I was stretched out on my couch, half watching some reality show I didn't care about, scrolling through my phone, debating whether I should bother making dinner or just eat a bowl of dry cereal again. Outside, the streetlights cast a familiar yellow glow over the empty road, and the occasional car passed by, its tires humming softly against the pavement. Everything was still, the kind of quiet you only get in a small town late at night. Then, at 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed violently in my hand, the jarring blare of an emergency alert making me flinch. The TV screen flashed red, cutting off mid-scene. A robotic voice crackled over the speakers of my radio, which I hadn't even realized was still plugged in. The same message was everywhere. "We are sorry." That was it. No warning about a storm, no evacuation instructions, just a vague, meaningless phrase that sent a strange chill up my spine. I sat up, phone still in my hand, staring at the words as they glowed on my screen. Sorry for what? I flicked to my messages and texted Ricky, my friend who lives across town. Did you get that? The message sent instantly, and the typing bubbles appeared almost immediately. Yeah, what the hell does "we are sorry" mean? It's probably a test or something. I had no answer. I looked outside, expecting to see people standing in the streets, a fire in the distance, but everything looked normal. The street was still empty. The houses around mine were dark, the residents either asleep or unconcerned. I turned the TV volume up, flipping through channels. I saw nothing but reruns, talk shows, commercials, like nothing had happened. No breaking news, no explanations. I considered calling someone, 911, the non-emergency line, anyone who might have more information. And that was when I heard a distant rumble. I couldn't tell what it was at first. Then I realized it sounded like aviation machinery. The hum of distant engines grew louder, deep and low, like thunder rolling over the horizon. Then, the sound became unmistakable, the rhythmic chop of helicopter blades cutting through the night sky. I stood up and walked to my window, pushing aside the curtain just enough to peer outside. Two helicopters, black, unmarked, swept low over the rooftops, moving with efficiency. Their searchlights scanned the streets, gliding across houses, yards, and parked cars. I watched as the beams passed over my neighbor's house, then my own, making the living room flicker in bright white light before plunging back into shadow. What the hell was happening? My phone screen lit up as I received a message from Ricky. "You seeing this?" "Yeah. Helicopters are hovering above my street right now. Anything weird on your end?" "Soldiers everywhere." "Well, I can't tell if they're actual normal soldiers. They're dressed in all black and wearing gas masks." "Soldiers?" I looked back out the window and saw them. Military vehicles, several of them, rolling through the neighborhood like a slow-moving parade. They weren't police cruisers or National Guard trucks. They were heavier, bigger, armored. Their matte black surfaces looked unnatural under the streetlights, as if they were sucking the glow into them rather than reflecting it. And walking beside them, rifles in hand, were dozens of soldiers in full tactical gear. They moved quickly, splitting off into groups and heading toward different houses. They weren't storming in. They weren't kicking down doors or yelling commands. They were knocking, almost politely, but something about it felt off. I watched as two soldiers approached my neighbor's house. They knocked. Mr. Dawson, the old man who lived there, answered. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the way his head tilted in confusion. He started shaking his head, as if he didn't like what he was hearing. Then, one of the soldiers put a hand on his shoulder. A firm grip. Dawson hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let them in. Another buzz from my phone. Power just went out. As if on cue, the lights in my house flickered. Once, twice. Then everything went dark. Streetlights, houses, even the military vehicles outside. All dead in an instant. I stood there in the dark, my heart pounding in my ears. Through the window, I could see. The soldiers didn't seem surprised. They kept moving, the night vision goggles glowing faint green as they worked their way down the block. This wasn't a power outage. This was planned. A cold realization settled in my stomach. They didn't want us to see something. And that's when I felt it. Not heard. Felt. A vibration in the ground. Not like the vehicles on the streets. It was heavier. I pressed myself closer to the window, squinting into the shadows. The helicopters were circling above, the spotlight scanning. But they weren't looking at the houses anymore. My phone buzzed again. Bro, I think we're in serious trouble. Then, At 9:45 p.m., the silence was shattered. A deep, guttural roar tore through the air. It wasn't like anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't a siren. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't even the kind of growl you'd expect from an animal. It was low and violent, the kind of sound that vibrated in your chest, clawing at something deep in your bones. I stumbled back, gripping the windowsill for balance. Then the gunfire started. First, a few single shots. Then, a barrage of bullets raining down from outside. I saw flashes of muzzle fire lighting up the darkness. Soldiers shouting commands. The helicopters overhead dropped flares, bathing the streets in red-orange light. Something huge was out there. I didn't wait to see what happened next. My instincts took over, screaming at me to move. Now, I grabbed my backpack, a flashlight, and a knife from the kitchen, gripping the handle so tightly my knuckles ached. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to focus. My breathing, quick and uneven. I pulled out my phone and texted Ricky. "We need to meet up." "Where are you?" Seconds passed. Then, "Gas station. Hurry." I slung my backpack over my shoulder and moved to the door, my pulse hammering. I hesitated for a second, one hand on the knob. A new sound made the decision for me. Screaming. Human screaming. From somewhere in the distance. I threw the door open and stepped into the night. The second I was outside, I could tell how wrong everything had become. The air smelled burnt and metallic, gunpowder mixed with blood. The streets, normally lit with warm streetlights, were now drenched in pulsing red from the flares overhead. Some people ran barefoot, some still in their pajamas, sprinting down the sidewalks, cutting through yards, shoving past each other in blind panic. I ducked low, sticking close to the houses as I made my way toward the gas station. I knew the layout of the town well enough to take back streets, avoiding the main roads where the military was still engaging whatever they were fighting. A few blocks down, I turned a corner and stopped dead. The street was flattened. It looked like a tornado had torn through. Everything was just leveled. Cars crumpled. Asphalt cracked. Streetlights snapped in half. The street was covered in the bodies of soldiers and civilians alike. Some were torn apart, their limbs scattered like discarded dolls. Others were smashed, flattened into the pavement, like something impossibly heavy had rolled over them. Their weapons, bent and crushed. There were no shell casings. No sign that they'd even had time to fire back before they were annihilated. Something unstoppable had come through here. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Where are you?" I forced my legs to move, stepping carefully around the destruction. Then, from the distance, that roar. Again, followed by a massive explosion. Right after the explosion, I lost service. I tried sending another message anyway. Almost there, but it didn't go through. I quickened my pace, keeping low, my breath coming in short gasps. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see something there. But all I saw were the ruins of my town, bathed in eerie red light from the still glowing flares. When I finally reached the gas station, my stomach sank. It was destroyed. The roof had partially collapsed. Glass littered the parking lot. A gas pump had been ripped from its foundation, cables and metal jutting out like snapped bones. The place looked like it had been hit by a wrecking ball. I hesitated, scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. My chest tightened. What if Ryan was buried under there? "Ryan," I called out, voice hoarse. For a moment, there was nothing, just the distant sound of helicopters, gunfire, and my own pulse hammering in my ears. Then, over here, Ryan's voice, faint but close. I vaulted over fallen shelves and broken glass. Behind the counter, crouched low and shaking, was Ryan. I barely had time to register my relief before. The ground shook beneath us. A vibration, deep and unnatural, rolled through the earth, rattling the debris around us. The air thickened, charged with something heavy. And then, the roar. Right outside, Ryan grabbed my wrist and yanked me down behind the counter. "Don't move." We pressed ourselves against the cold tile, heartbeats thundering in sync. The gas station trembled. Dust and broken glass trickled from the fractured ceiling. The vibrations grew stronger, heavier. It was here. The vibrations weren't just tremors beneath my feet. They were a pulse, a presence, a force pressing against my ribs like the weight of the ocean above a drowning man. Dust swirled in the air, catching in the fractured light, filtering through the gas station's shattered windows. A deep hum, Something primal, mechanical, and wrong filled the space between the beats of my heart. Ryan's grip on my wrist was ironclad, his breath ragged, each inhale catching like a faulty gear. I turned my head, just slightly, enough to see the shape outside. It moved like a paradox. Massive, yet swift. Unnatural, yet alive. A contradiction given form. Its limbs, too many, too jointed, twitched with inhuman precision. The muscles beneath it stitched together hide shifting, learning, adapting. The flare light caught the wet sheen of its exposed flesh, and for the first time, I saw it breathe. A hollow, unnatural expansion. A ripple of flesh and sinew. A machine that had never been engineered. The soldiers outside had gone silent. I knew what that meant. Predators don't announce themselves to prey. The monster's presence was a gravitational force, drawing all energy inward, sucking the breath from the wind, the sound from the air, the courage from the men. Then, a shot. One. Singular. Precise. A trigger pulled, a fate sealed. The bullet struck. The thing jerked, not in pain, not in shock, but in awareness. The way a god might tilt its head at the audacity of a mortal's defiance. The next second, the world detonated. Gunfire erupted from every direction, tracer rounds slicing through the night like electric veins. Flares streaked the sky. Helicopters banked sharply, missiles screaming through the air. The monster moved, and I saw something impossible. It didn't dodge. It didn't brace. It shifted, like light bending around an event horizon. Its form blurred, muscles twisting, reality itself folding to accommodate its mass. The bullets missed, not because they were inaccurate, but because they had never been destined to hit. It learned. Ryan's grip tightened on my wrist. His eyes were locked on mine, wide, pupils dilated, the white stark against the grime on his face. "We have to go," he mouthed. The words barely made it to my brain before a screech, metallic, guttural, raw, ripped through the air. The soldiers were dying. Not killed, not slaughtered, unmade. I risked a glance over the counter. A soldier, his rifle mid-fire, was lifted into the air, his body contorting unnaturally. Not crushed, not torn, but absorbed. His scream turned liquid, gurgling into something that wasn't human. And then, he was gone. Not dropped, not thrown. Gone. Ryan was pulling me now. I barely registered my feet moving. The broken glass beneath us, the faint tremor of my own breath. We slipped through the ruins of the gas station, weaving between fallen shelves and twisted metal. Every step was calculated, every movement a whisper in the symphony of destruction outside. Then, a break. A gap in the wreckage leading toward the alley behind the station. Our chance. We moved, fast, silent. The air hummed with static, the kind you feel before lightning strikes. Electricity coiled in my spine. I knew. We were being watched. The world shifted. Ryan froze. And then, a voice. Not human. Not machine. Something between. "Do you understand?" My blood turned to ice. Ryan was shaking. His fingers dug into my arm. His breath shallow, his body locked in place. I forced myself to turn, and I saw it. The monster, no longer distant, no longer hidden in shadow. Close. Too close. Its eyes, some glowing, some dark, some missing, fixed on me. The second mouth beneath its first quivered, the slits in its skin expanding and contracting. The voice again, deep, resonant, inside my skull. "Do you understand?" I did. Not in words. Not in thoughts. In instinct. In a way that bypassed logic and settled deep into the marrow of my bones. This wasn't an attack. This wasn't an invasion. This was correction. I felt it. In the space where words fail, where comprehension shatters. It wasn't hunting us. It was fixing something. The emergency alert. The soldiers. The destruction. This wasn't a catastrophe. This was a purge. And we weren't supposed to be here. Ryan snapped. His fight-or-flight instincts overrode his reason, his body moving before his mind could stop it. He ran. The monster moved. Faster than physics should allow. Faster than thought. Faster than anything I had ever seen. One moment Ryan was there. The next, he wasn't. The air where he had stood shimmered, warped, corrected. I choked on nothing, my throat seizing, my body locking up. I was next. I knew I was next. But I wasn't. The thing looked at me. It saw me. And then, it turned. It moved. It left. And I remained, breathless, shaking, alive. A mistake. A soldier's radio crackled to life in the distance. A voice, hollow, broken. Containment has failed. If you are still in the area. A pause. Then, softer. May God help you. I turned. In the distance, the sky ignited. A blinding white light. A final, desperate solution. The shockwave came first. The force, impossible. Then, the sound, deafening, absolute. A wall of force and fire consuming everything behind me. The soldiers had made their choice. Code black. A purge of a purge. Everything wiped away. Except me. The mistake. And for the first time since it had all begun, I wondered if I had ever truly survived.